Started. So welcome everybody to our webinar here, filling the gap, how students feel post-application and the support universities can offer us. So you'll have to forgive me, I'm doing a little bit of wizardry on both sides, doing the presentation and on the Zoom. So apologies if I make a little bit of a mistake, but let's fingers crossed, hope it works. And it didn't straight away. There you go. Oh no, here we are. It's always the way. So welcome everybody. So my name is Grace Etheridge. I'll be hosting today's webinar. I am the Community Engagement and Student Voice Manager here at the Student Room. I'll just pass over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, my name is Jenny Smith and I'm the Policy Manager at Student Minds. Really excited to be here today and talk to you all about, well, both how students can prepare for university and how they access support and what we can do to help them when they arrive.
Hi, so I'm Beth Wiles. I'm the Research Manager at the Student Room. So I work in the TSR Insight team across a range of sort of qualitative and quantitative research projects. So both for the Student Room internally and also for our clients. So I'll just be on hand on the chat and Q&A to answer any questions that you might have as we go through.
Amazing. Thank you, Jenny and Beth. So we'll just get started. So today, what will we be sharing? So we'll be looking at student sentiment directly from the Student Room Forum. So that's including temperature check polls from both 2022 and 2023. We'll also be looking at the quantitative research that was conducted by TSR Insight, our full service market research agency that Beth works for. And that was taken from the 4th to the 6th of February 2023, so just at the beginning of February this year. With 353 prospective 2023 entry applicants in England, aged 16 plus. We'll also be hearing from the wonderful Jenny at Student Minds, as she mentioned, on what students need right now in terms of mental health support. So first off, we're just going to reflect on the experience of 2022 freshers. So who better to learn from when it comes to support the new 2023 freshers than the most recent freshers themselves. So this is just to set our scene and remember some of the lessons that we've learned from the year just gone. So before starting university last year, freshers were most concerned about making friends. So we promoted this poll in June last year, so just in the middle of exam season, and students were really apprehensive around making friends. So we wanted to get a sense of how they were feeling ahead of their big move to university. And we spoke about this poll back in our Sense of Belonging webinar that we ran in September last year. So we do see freshers with concerns about making friends each year. So from, around now in the application stage all the way up to starting university. This did feel very pronounced when we discovered it at the time. We'll discuss in a minute some more research that we've done in relation to this topic, but this was something that was particularly interesting. Reflecting again on life skills and money management were being the top skills that students felt that they needed help to build. So we asked this question immediately after students received their results last year, so in August, and they were beginning to make plans before heading off to their chosen university. So we normally consistently see life skills, including money management, being asked about on the TSR forum. So this was something to be expected. We regularly see students worrying about how to cook, clean, budget. This was something that was represented in this poll. Feeling confident in these basic skills isn't just like a practical need, but it also can be a potential tool in their toolbox for friend making, social acceptance. A wide variety of concerns really are impacted by money management and life skills. So again, something that was particularly interesting, and a quote there from a soon to be fresher as well. We then have a poll that we ran at the beginning of the academic year last year in September for students who were just moving into university accommodation. Settling into the accommodation was a particular pain point for a lot of students. For many, it's their first time living out of home, so it makes a lot of sense. It does point to how important these opportunities are when facilitated by the university and accommodation providers during those early days, but also ongoing for students to manage such a big transition. Students really concerned about fitting in, making friends, and feeling like they belong at their university. And this was reflected quite early on in their freshers experience last year. So now moving on to how students are feeling ahead of starting university this year, so in 2023. So this is from our research that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. So in this research, shortly after the January UCAS deadline, which was on the 25th of January, almost all 2023 entry respondents, so that's 98%, had some type of worry that was really plaguing them at the time. So concerns were most likely to focus in on closer to home in areas such as getting grades that they needed, so around 83% worried about that, and motivating themselves to study, so around 70% really feeling that impact. This was compared to the broader global issues such as climate change or war and conflict. However, cost of living as a broader global issue, because it affects not only the wider population but themselves as well, was more of a concern. Around 2/3 of students saying that that was a worry for them. So the top two concerns seem really relevant to those students' current situation and that immediate challenge, which is exams coming up. It is important to consider that the impact that these two factors may continue to have for students as they move towards university. Lack of motivation is something that we've really seen as a massive issue cropping up again and again on the forums, and that is a more of a year-round consistency from starting school or college, university, and moving on through the academic year. So this is something that could continue on all the way up to exams and the worries surrounding there. We also learned in the pandemic that the way that students receive their grades, but more importantly, whether they felt those grades accurately represented their efforts, continue to impact their perceptions of themselves well into their university course. So this is to say that imposter syndrome can really plague students and affect things like motivations and stress levels. So it's worth bearing that in mind. So the cost of living concern is probably not a surprise to any of us. I'm sure it's on the majority of people's minds, and when we're helping support students as well, the forefront of the thinking that you are doing to really support them. But it's a pertinent one to discuss because a lot of students frequently tell us that they feel like they're lacking in money management skills. And we know from previous community polls that the understanding of student finance and how it works within the student population is typically low. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail further in the webinar. This also correlates with other polls that have been run previously by social mobility charity like the Sutton Trust or Black Billions report on student money and well-being, finding that students are really feeling the impact at university of the cost of living crisis, with the Sutton Trust opinion poll finding that under half of undergraduate students have missed a lecture to do paid work, for example, and Black Billions report finding that 9 in 10 students are worried about money, with a 12% year-on-year increase. So it's starting now and it will only build and continue as they get to university. So having a look at a word cloud that we created from asking students how they're feeling about their applications. So as you can see, the brighter the pink colour, that is the most mentioned kind of word to describe how they were feeling. Stressed and nervous really standing out there. However, that's not to say that there are not also some positive emotions associated with this. We can see that excited was also an emotion that was frequently mentioned, and a lot of just confusion, unsurety, apprehensiveness, feeling a bit stressful, a bit tired, all of these kind of emotions leading up into how they're feeling about their university applications right now. So again, we can see that respondents had mixed feelings about starting university. So more than half were equally excited and nervous about this, around 57%. But we did see that nearly 20% were also feeling more nervous than excited. It is unsurprising that students are feeling that mixture of excited and nervous, especially with the unknown ahead of them. It's likely that after exams, when they have more of an understanding on how they've performed, that they may be more polarized on their feelings. So either feeling really excited as they feel that they've done quite well, or more nervous if they feel that they haven't performed to the best of their ability. So definitely one to keep an eye out over the next couple of months as the exam season comes. So how are students feeling about making friends? So we talked earlier about the fact that students can really worry about making friends. It's a top concern for them. In terms of making these connections, there are also mixed feelings. So although, 54% agreed that they could have been confident about making friends, 69% were worried about feeling lonely as well. Despite a move away from COVID-19 regulations too, almost 3/5 agreed that their experience would be different before the pandemic. However, fewer than 1 in 5 felt more comfortable forming connections online rather than in person. So that's suggesting that the face-to-face aspect of that is still desirable for the majority. So looking now at the support students need. These are some conversations started by students in our applications and UCAS forum on TSR in a 48-hour period around the 6th of March, so around the weekend and yesterday. So these are just some examples of questions that we see asked all the time, which really illustrates that desire for comparison, advice from current students and location in application decisions and how they're feeling right now. So questions around offer holder days, a lot of students confused about what it could offer them. So what is it that's different from open days and how does it help them with their decision making? Also, a lot of concerns around communication too. So people sending off documents, not receiving any communication back. A lot of concerns around how long it's taking for offers to come through and if there's anything wrong with their application because of it. And then we've also got the more classic comparison questions that we're seeing a lot at the moment around which university should they choose now that their offers are coming through. A lot of students asking for advice and support and guidance on how to make those decisions. So we also asked our current community, what support do they think would be useful for students starting university? So that's students who've already been through the process or coming up to that process. What support do they think is going to be most useful for these students, looking back at experiences that they've had or experiences that they would like to have, for example? This is similar to feedback from the 2022 freshers as they were preparing for university, as we spoke about earlier. It's a real focus here on life skills and being independent, money management, and study skills. So it's worth mentioning in this particular poll that students could only choose one option. So it really shows what they think is the most important, rather than kind of selecting a mixture of the support that they would like, for example. We promoted this earlier on this year. Here are some of the comments from this particular poll. So there's somebody speaking about as a third year, they really would have appreciated some more advice and guidance on how to write an essay or some kind of structure with that. Feeling that they were thrown into the deep end with be analytical, there is no structure, but that wasn't particularly helpful for them. But they actually went for budgeting support because they felt that it was most important that students got support in understanding the concept of money and how far it goes. And so actually, for a lot of the students who voted in the poll, a lot of them are saying that they wanted to vote for more than one, even though we kind of held their hand a little bit and pushed them towards just picking one. They wanted to choose both mental health and study skills. saying that mental health support shouldn't just be provided by the university or just one agency or organisation, but something that everyone should be aware of and involved with. And then somebody saying here that, you know, they don't think it's the responsibilities of universities, but the responsibilities of schools for cooking, budget and laundry, and going into a little bit more depth about how they would like to see it happen, but how students really do feel that they need that support in general life skills, and who's able to offer it at this particular time. And universities are in a good place to be able to do that. So having a look here back to our TSR, our survey research. So the question here was, thinking ahead to starting university, what support do these 2023 applicants think would be most useful? And this one was multiple response. So in contrast to our previous survey that we just spoke about, asking current and former students what support they feel would be most useful for first years, this is what the first years actually thought themselves. So budgeting and planning finances, it's no surprise, it's at the top there, with nearly 80% of students saying that that was something that would be really useful for them. Getting a part-time job as well in comparison to that, and in connection with that, is again incredibly important. A lot of students are looking for part-time roles before they start university this year, and working out how they can get that cash flow in place before they start. So really important for them, and something that is at the top of their minds. Again, planning time and managing workload, we saw that spoken about by current and former students in our previous poll, and this was something that the applicants also believed was really important for them, feeling like they're able to manage their time and workload alongside, for example, getting that part-time job. It means that there is more information out there that they need to be able to work out how best to do that. So definitely something that supporters, providers, universities could be offering to them. Again, we see that real need for connection starting early with applicants, so connecting those students with other students. We see it a lot on the student room. We are constantly seeing students wanting to find out who else has applied to that university, who else has received an offer from that university, and that connection before they start is really important to helping build a sense of community before they even get to the university. So very much a key part of the information that they need before starting. And again, we see motivation come up there as a key concern for a lot of students. So how to stay motivated is kind of a bit of an age-old question, really. There's so many different things that work for so many different people, but just some kind of advice to support them is really helpful. And getting them through exams and getting them into university and keeping them on track when things can seem really difficult to stay motivated for can be especially important. Also, as we saw from, again, previous polls, learning to do things on their own. Nearly 60% of students saying that they would like some support with that, and developing independent study skills too. So how do they transition from that more focused, supportive A-level stage into a more independent, free-form university experience where they're expected to do a lot more work on their own? Mental health support was really important for over half of the respondents, with only 1% saying that none of the above would be important for them or helpful for them. So when it comes to accessing support at university, we asked a question about how important or unimportant it is to find out more information about support services that university offers to its students before deciding what universities to apply for. So we can see here that it is really important that students get as much information as they can about the support services that university offers them. So that is 64% of students saying that that would impact their decision making. So something really important to consider there about how you are marketing your support services to applicants and to offer holders. It's something that is obviously a really important part of their decision-making process. So how can we make sure that that's front and centre and available to all of these students? We can then see here that a lot of students are really struggling with understanding student finance at the moment. So we promoted this poll last week, asking 2023 applicants how do they understand how student finance works. And we can see here that over 83% of students only had some idea, with over 45% of those students saying that they have absolutely no idea about how student finance works, with student finance opening last week and applications being able to now be submitted. This is just showcasing that students really do need some support on how to get those student finance applications in and sorted. This is compared to 35% in the same poll that we ran last year. So 35% saying that they had no idea at the same time last year, compared to 45% this year. So quite a big increase. So any support that you are able to provide applicants and offer holders around how to get their university student finance applications in, and any support around kind of timelines and processes would be really key. Definitely something that students are looking for in this application cycle. So how are our official reps helping on the student room? So for anybody who isn't aware, working with the student room, universities can have a student or official rep come onto site to be able to connect with students in the place that they're talking about all of their application advice and looking for that kind of guidance. We have here University of Portsmouth student rep, who are a fantastic rep at providing peer-to-peer support for a student who is really struggling with motivation. They're talking about their own experiences and relating it to actionable points, which is something particularly helpful for students nowadays. So they really need that kind of spelling out, like, this is what you can do, this is how you can do it, and it makes it more human as well. This one was particularly interesting too, because the student was just saying, you know, like, this is, I struggle with it as well, like, this is a problem for me too, and this is how we can help and support you. It really does showcase the university's student life offering here, and this can be applied to just connecting with students in any customer service environment. But by talking about current students' experience, we're using those services and how they're feeling about it, really does showcase how supportive that student life offering is. So a great experience here and a great reply from Portsmouth. And then here again, we've had a lot of concerns around communication from students on site. A lot of students feeling a bit unsure about what they're meant to be doing due to difficulties with communication and really struggling with understanding exactly you know, what's normal and what's not in terms of getting their application in and the processes that happen after. Somebody was looking just for a little bit of reassurance and human-to-human interaction within a situation that the post was finding really stressful. Keele postgraduate here were fantastic. They were offering a really quick response, and admitting that nothing is perfect is a really difficult situation to be in. Communicating with current applicants and offer holders to get them the information that they need, but they're trying to take the stress out of the situation and just letting them know kind of how long roughly this takes. Sometimes that's all the students are looking for, how long to expect this to take, so that when it becomes out of the ordinary, they're able to then step in and know when to take action. And they're also really fantastic here in providing clear contact details for departmental communication. So that puts the student in touch with the right people fast. And I think that is something, again, really important. The actionable decisions that students can take, really showcasing how quickly students can talk to the people that they need to talk to, is key in these types of situations where customer service and ensuring that a student gets the most support possible is really important here. So, oh, gone a little bit too far. Already going into Jenny's section there. Sorry, Jenny. So just having a look at the key takeaways from the section that we've just spoken about here. So looking back at the polls and the research that our wonderful TSR Insights team conducted for this webinar. So almost all students are feeling concerned about something at the moment. It's no surprise, but it's largely related to their confidence in their own skills and abilities, as opposed to more broader global issues. So really focusing in on that exam season coming up and feeling really concerned about motivation and getting the grades that they need. Their ability to make friends and fear of loneliness continues to feature in these students' concerns as they consider starting university. So some great actionable points that you can take from that is to consider how you can connect these students ahead of starting university, whether that's creating more social environment, offer holidays or applicant days where they can meet and mingle and chat to other students a little bit more, or other options around social media, the student room, variety of other tools and techniques that you can use to bring communication between students together in a safe way and really create that sense of community before they start university. It's done, you know, in a variety of different ways so well by universities, but there's definitely more opportunity to really focus on that community building as soon as possible. So life skills and money management are core skills that students feel they need support in developing, along with getting a part-time job and learning time management techniques. So supporting your applicants by posting kind of job postings out to them as well ahead of starting university so that they're able to get that support early and get their plans in place when it comes to budgeting and making the financial decisions that they need to before they even start university is a great way to action this point here. And any kind of life skills or money management support that you have in terms of resources that can be added on to current communications, put out on social media or other sites that you're using could be really, really helpful for current applicants looking for that support from university providers. Students are really struggling to understand student finance and they really need that support in accessing it. So as we saw, you know, that is increasing from last year on year. So we really need to try and get that information out to students around the process, the timeline, and what they need to be doing now, when, and how. The majority of students are confident that they could get support at university if they needed it, and they feel that the support services offered is a really important factor when deciding which universities to apply to. So that is something that you could be showcasing from now, how your student support offering starts before application, if that's something that you're able to do, and all the way into freshers and all the way beyond as well, so that students feel supported throughout the whole cycle and not just that they have kind of more of a support at the beginning and then it kind of pieces off. And this kind of fits quite nicely into our next section, which is from Jenny at the lovely Student Mind, who'll be talking a little bit more about support services at university in relation to mental health. So I'm now going to pass over to Jenny, and Jenny, I'll be doing the slides for you, so if you just want to let me know when you want to move on to the next slide, I'll sort that out for you. Thank you.
Will do, Grace. Thank you so much, and definitely a tough act to follow. I found that absolutely fascinating. So thanks everyone, and thank you to the Student Room for having me on today on behalf of Student Minds. So a little bit about us quickly, if you haven't heard of us. We are the UK's national student mental health charity, and well, I'm going to talk to you today about a variety of things. First of all, just a quick kind of touch point on why we talk about student mental health specifically. What's unique about student mental health, which merits our existence, and what the kind of, you know, issues are that are facing students. We're going to look at the impact of the cost of living crisis and the things which are worrying students the most right now. We're going to think about disclosures and the transition into university and what you as staff members can do to support prospective and arriving students with that process. And I'm going to talk you through a variety of resources and support that are available as well. So Grace, if that's all right, ready to move on to the next slide? So, student mental health at university, what is it? What are the stats? Why are we talking about it? And I just want to give everyone a little heads up that in the next slide, there will be some mention of suicide and suicidal ideation and behaviour. So just to make you aware in case you need to step out for a second. Thanks, Grace. So why are we talking about student mental health? So if you listen to the narrative in a lot of the media and I think in general public knowledge, there is a consensus, but a misconception that students have worse mental health than their peers, so non-students of the same age. And this isn't consistently shown through the evidence. In fact, some evidence suggests that students have better mental health. They could, on average, or better quality of life. There could be a variety of reasons for this. It could be that the people who have good mental health, good mental well-being, who were supported early on, are then equipped to succeed and more likely to go to university. We're not quite sure. But the important thing to bear in mind here is that it's not necessarily the uni experience which is creating distress in the student population in every single case. It can be, but that's not exclusive to that. In fact, when we look at students compared to other people of the same age cohort, school leavers in particular, there's pretty much a consistent level of mental illness and distress amongst both groups. So, like I say, students don't report consistently lower life satisfaction or quality of life than the general population, but also, interestingly, suicidal behaviour is less common in students than non-students, and students are also less likely in a statistically significant way to die by suicide than their non-student peers. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, why are we focusing on student mental health then if they are doing as well as, if not better than, in some cases, their peers? Next slide, please. Thank you. So we know that students who've been diagnosed with a mental health condition are less likely to get past their first year of studies than their their peers about a mental health diagnosis. So in other words, when students arrive at university and have a mental health condition, they are less likely to continue with their studies. They might decide it's not right for them. They might really struggle with the transition, and we'll talk about why that might be. But of course, this is a real shame, because if someone's made it to university and made that decision to go and the commitment that that requires, you know, they've jumped through all those hurdles, they've gone through that initial transition, it's a real shame then if they are end up at a point where they feel unable to continue for a reason that isn't their choosing. So this is also important because about half of the UK's 18-year-old school leavers will go into higher education. There's about 2.5 million students at UK universities as of the latest data from 2022. But also, you're having this tremendous life transition right at the point where most mental health conditions first present themselves. So between the ages of 15 and 25, and if you imagine your typical UK undergraduates, they're within that range, that's when 50% of mental health diagnoses emerge, and 75% of mental health diagnoses emerge before the age of 25. So this is a really critical emotional and mental developmental window for students, and it's coming right at a point where they're making this huge leap into independence and a new level of academic study. So the reason we're talking about this, those are some of the reasons we're talking about this, but also students have a different experience from non-students, and that's why we need specialised support for them. The experience of potentially going to a new town or city, a new country, and the additional pressures, there's self-doubt about whether you can cope with that level of study. There's so many different factors which we need to account for when we're providing support for these students if we want them to be equipped to succeed. Next slide, please, Grace. I feel like Chris Whitty when I say that. So why are we talking about student mental health? So why are transitions a big deal? So we've got this critical window in terms of the emergence of potential mental health problems. And at the same time, students can be juggling all of these things. So they could be living independently for the first time. This might be the first time they're managing their finances. And I thought it was so interesting what Grace said about how so many students don't feel like they understand student finance, feel really confused by the system. I work in higher education. I feel confused by the system, so I don't blame them whatsoever. Coming to a new city and or country, they might have doubts about their academic competence, whether their course is the right thing for them. They're also, a lot of students are just really discovering who they are for the first time, taken into a new context. They might be exploring their sexuality, they might be exploring their political views, their new hobbies. But you find out a lot about yourself when you're thrown into this new university situation, encountering new people and new ideas. Another thing as well is that students are being separated from their existing support networks. So this can be something interpersonal, like their family, their friends, teachers, work colleagues. It could be that if they were accessing CAMS, they've now aged out of the cohort to be able to use those services and using different mental health services. It might be that because they've moved, they can't get that consistent medical support either. There's a variety of things going on, and any individual single one of these could cause stress and distress in a person's life. So imagine dealing with all these things at once. That's what we're talking about. That's why this matters. Next slide, please. Oh. So what role can staff play? Why, what can we actually do to help? Because I appreciate, okay, this is a really, the scope of this issue is tremendous. Where do we even begin? So one thing which I imagine a lot of your institutions will be aware of, but I would always recommend checking out as an individual staff member is our University Mental Health Charter. This is a framework we've devised, academically rigorously peer reviewed, drawing on the views of over 1,000 students across all 4 nations of the UK at something like 60 institutions, I want to say, to really understand every aspect of the student experience. And when I say that, what I mean is a whole university approach. So a whole university approach means that we see universities and students not just in terms of their academics, but in terms of every facet of their life. And this is where they come in. So gone are the days where when we talk about student mental health, we think that's just for the mental health support service team, or maybe at a stretch, that's for that student's personal tutor. What are we doing as admissions teams and digital content teams? What's the porter doing? What's the librarian doing? Where can they fit in and feel supported? And I've touched on that in the next section as well. We have a publication called Student Mental Health, the Role and Experiences of Academics. And while this is about academics who support students, I would say there's a lot of lessons there that are applicable to university staff of every discipline and profession. So what we have to recognise, and I'm sure you're all aware, is that students will present with mental health difficulties where they'll present. And that's not always going to be where the institution might want them to. So a lot of the time when you're overwhelmed with, as we've seen, all those different transitional pressures all at once, if you're a student, you might not know where to access support. There might be 8 different services with different combinations of well-being and advice and guidance in their name. And how do you know which one's right for you? How do you know if your level of distress and difficulty is enough to qualify you for that service? How do you even know that it's okay? Because there is a huge stigma around support seeking. So it might be the case that actually the first person that notices the student's not coping very well is when you're a member of the admissions team and you've emailed a student and they send you back an email which is very concerning about how they'd love to come but they're worried because they don't think they're good enough and they've been struggling emotionally, or you're the porter or you're the cleaner who goes into their room at 2 in the morning, or he goes into their room and notices it's in complete disarray and it never used to be. But in order to deliver that, of course, we do need to support staff to feel safe and empowered to provide that level of signposting and have that level of mental health awareness without asking too much of them. Because if you are a librarian, you're not a clinical psychologist, and that's okay. So that's why we talk about giving staff training and support so they know how to handle these conversations and disclosures, but also boundaries so they know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and most importantly signpost students effectively to the places where they can get the level of help that they need. And finally, I'd say as well, staff can keep advocating for students. So really simple, the fact you're all here today is a testimony to that. Keep caring, keep asking questions. How are students being impacted by this? What can we do to support them? Be curious, that's what I would say. Next slide, please. In terms of our specific kind of function, if you're in admissions, recruitment, if you're supporting that transition into university as well, the single biggest change in my view that you can make is to make sure that your promotional materials are supportive of students and they're saying the right things. So what kind of things are we talking about here? We're talking about one clear access point of support. So like I say, students don't have to choose between an index of 10 different services, because that in itself can be incredibly overwhelming at a time where students are bombarded with information. Why not send them to one service or one point of access where then they can be triaged into the appropriate support? 2, address common worries and concerns. And this sounds really obvious, but I'll talk a bit more about the kinds of issues that questions and fears that students have, particularly when it comes to help seeking and disclosing the mental health condition. And sometimes it's good to be upfront about them actually in your materials and say, for instance, oh, this is confidential, or oh, if you disclose a mental health condition, this isn't going to affect how you are treated by the university, or it's not going to go on your academic record. Explain the benefits of seeking support. Again, I'll touch on this more later. Avoid stereotypes, and this might sound really obvious, but when we look at the kind of students who do seek help compared against the students who are experiencing distress at university and diagnosed mental health conditions, overwhelmingly, the students who do seek help are disproportionately white students, female students, students from the UK, and straight or heterosexual students. So what we're noticing here is that students who feel more empowered to seek out support fit a certain profile, but they're not necessarily, of course, that means that that doesn't mean to say that students who don't fit that description, that stereotype, are experiencing mental health difficulties. In fact, for instance, LGBTQ plus students are far more likely to experience a range of mental health conditions and distress, right up to suicidal ideation. So it's really important that when you talk about accessing mental health support and student mental health, you are representing every type of student and not falling back on stereotypes about realizing. Destigmatize the experience. So this is something that we, as people who want to get students excited about university and want them to feel positive about it and think about the potential, this is something that we can play inadvertently into without realizing. And it's this idea of course, students are told and bombarded with the idea that university is going to be the best time of their life, and there's so many fantastic opportunities, so much potential. The issue is, of course, if you're then a student who arrives at university and you are struggling, perhaps you feel lonely, or perhaps you're worried about your academic competency or making friends, when you've been told for years and years and years by the university and by society at large that this should be the best time of your life, it can be very alienating and isolating to feel like you're doing it wrong, especially when there is this stigma, this idea that, oh, I'm not having a good time, but I'm supposed to be, so something must be wrong with me. So I think it's actually, and I think what Grace pointed out was really interesting about how students want to know where to access support and want to know where to get help at their university, and that's what they're thinking about before they arrive. It's okay to say that some people might find the experience hard. In fact, most students will have a point where they find coming to university hard in those first few weeks and months. Being honest about it will not make more students feel unhappy. It will help more students get the support they need earlier. So putting that in your promotional materials pre-arrival, right through to arrival, and in those first months will make a huge positive difference. And kind of feeding off from that point, represent the ups and downs of the university experience in your materials as well. Like I've said, talk about loneliness, talk about academic worries, talk about the cost of living crisis, which I'm about to get into. This isn't going to encourage students to, first of all, this isn't going to change students' expectations, because as we've seen, students are already worrying about these things before they arrive at university. It's going to make them feel heard, it's going to make them feel less alone, and it's going to make them access support, and that's going to lead to better outcomes. Next slide, please, Grace. And again, so yeah, cost of living crisis. So this has been financial difficulties have had an impact on student mental health before the pandemic, before Brexit, before the war in Ukraine, all of these things, but it's just getting worse as a consequence of the cost of living crisis. So we know that in British university undergraduates, financial difficulties are a predictor of greater depression and stress cross-sectionally. They're also linked with poorer mental health in general, greater rates of alcohol dependence, psychosis at higher incidences, and greater anxiety. Next slide, please. Yes, as I mentioned, they can also have an indirect impact on students' mental health indirectly, and this is through secondary factors. So for instance, if a student is performing poorly academically or not living up to their own kind of expectations or potential, that can then make them feel down about themselves and be a source of distress and anxiety. Equally, their physical health as well. If a student is depressed, they're less likely to be able to take care of themselves, whether that's through proper nutrition or sleep or physical activity, whether they become socially isolated. So this can have a knock-on impact. And it can also, when they fail in these areas, then have an impact on their mental health. So another thing to think about is how finances can stop students or force students to withdraw from certain aspects of student life, and therefore impact their mental health too. So for instance, a student who has to work a lot of part-time hours, we know that about 1 in 3 students who work part-time work over 15 hours a week to support themselves. That's going to impact their academic life if they can't make things such as tutorials, lectures. It's going to give them less time to study and also less time to rest, which is absolutely critical. That failing then or struggling then academically is going to have an impact on their self-esteem, an impact on their confidence, an impact on their mental health. So it's really, really important we address this. And something else to mention as well, speaking of student finance, is that student finance, the maximum maintenance allowance in England has not risen in line with inflation for it's 8 years now. And actually, neither has the threshold for household income either. So basically the thresholds by which Student Finance England determines whether students, well, how much support financially students receive have stayed quite low. So as inflation does push salaries up, more and more students household in terms of their households being priced out of the maximum student financial support. But also on top of that, the amount of student maintenance funding from Student Finance England has stayed lower than inflation. So they're experiencing real terms pay cuts, or not pay cuts, maintenance support cuts year on year on year. Next slide, please, Grace. I'm gonna run through these because there's a lot in here. So the Office for National Statistics does follow these kind of things and does follow the cost of living crisis and its impact on students. So whistle-stop tour. In general, about 45% of students say their mental health and well-being has worsened since autumn 2022. 91% of current students say they're worried about the rising cost of living. 62% of students are cutting back on food and essentials such as hygiene products. 29% are skipping non-mandatory classes, and 25% have taken on new debt. This includes things like credit card debt, overdrafts, loans, things which most students will not have the financial maneuverability to cope with or take on in a financially responsible manner, but they have no choice because of the insufficient state of student funding and the rising cost of living. Next slide, please, Grace. Thank you. So on Student Minds, we have heard from, well, we've listened and we have developed our cost of living hub. This is just a shot of the top of the page, which isn't necessarily showing very much, to be fair. Next slide, please, Grace. But this includes a range of support and signposting. So here's a sample of the stuff available on the Cost of Living Hub. We have got a find support section, including dedicated support pages on things like managing your money worries, how to make a student budget, so budgeting, where to find extra funding at university. We refer on to external charities who are equipped to deal with certain money issues. So Step Change, which is a debt charity, Citizens Advice. We have a university support directory, which is support local to each student's university. So students can access support through their university team or local third sector organizations. We've also got a fact sheet there, which has some more loads of statistics, data evidence about the cost of living crisis and how it impacts student mental health. And more. So I've got a link to that at the end of this slide. Definitely do check that out if you want to learn more. Next slide, please, Grace. Okay, so I appreciate I've talked for a long time, so I'm going to try and keep this quick. Disclosing a mental health condition to UCAS universities. This is another thing you can do as staff who are supporting prospective and incoming students and students who've just arrived to make their experience better. So like I said before, getting students to talk about their mental health or presenting the possibility to them that they might be struggling with their mental health does not increase the incidence of mental health among poor mental health among students. It just means that the students who need support access it earlier, and then we're talking about prevention rather than treatment, which prevents far more, I suppose, damage and negative experiences and impacts in a student's life. So next slide, please, Grace. So when students apply to university for UCAS, as you know, and in fact, when they accept an offer or receive an offer and they reach out to yourselves directly, they are often given the opportunity to disclose any diagnosed mental health condition they have. So despite this, only about 1 in 2 students will disclose their mental health condition to their university. This is for a number of reasons. Students could be worried that this might influence the outcome of their university application. So they're worried that an institution might turn them down because of the stigma attached to having a mental health condition. They might be worried about treated negatively or differently in their interactions with university staff in terms of accessing their course or extracurricular opportunities. They could be concerned that the family member will find out, that their school might find out, or that otherwise someone that they don't want to find out will find out. And they also maybe don't understand the benefits of disclosure. So what are the benefits? Why should we be encouraging students to disclose their mental health condition to their institution? Next slide, please. So When students disclose their mental health condition to an institution, the institution can proactively reach out to them and get them access to support even before they arrive at university. This can be talking to a mental health or disability advisor, for instance, to talk about what support they need and to figure out a support plan. This can be to get reasonable adjustments in place. There's plenty of benefits here, and this is one less thing a student has to think about when they arrive. Students don't have to wait as long to access support, so this is pretty intuitive. The earlier a student accesses support, the earlier they'll get to it. We know that a lot of services have issues with waiting lists and demands on capacity. The earlier a student accesses support, the quicker we can get them to what they need, and they can go on to flourish in the university environment. It's also worth noting that when a student discloses a mental health condition that qualifies as a disability, the university is legally required to make reasonable adjustments which take account of the student's needs. So this is, from a student perspective, really important, because it means that the institution will and should follow up with appropriate support to support them in their studies. Next slide, please. So yeah, this gives them the chance to start on the strongest foundation possible. If a student arrives at university and realizes they are struggling, they know where to get support. There'll be somebody who's dealing with their case for them. And that takes out that whole stressful element of being so overwhelmed with everything else at once and not knowing where to go. Like I said, students are more likely to academically succeed when they are accessing mental health support, which again is quite self-evident. It means that students don't unnecessarily miss out on things like disabled students allowance. In fact, only 29% of students who have a disability access disabled students allowance, which is a real shame, because it can be used to bring access to all sorts of support, such as mental health advisors. So this isn't just things such as accessibility aids, but can also be support for students who are experiencing mental health difficulties. And also, it's worth knowing that 78%, so almost 4 in 5 students who disclose their mental health condition to their university, say they've, through UCAS or directly, have said that they've either had a very good or good experience with then accessing that support. So broadly, the students who do disclose are glad they did it. Next slide, please. Okay, and next slide again, thank you. So I'm just going to talk you through quickly some of the support and resources that you can be familiar with as staff to signpost students to and to just be aware of. So Student Space is our online, direct and completely free and confidential mental health support platform, funded by HEFCE and the Office of Students. HEFCE and the Office of Students, beg your pardon. So like I say, it's free, confidential and anonymous. It's available all hours of the day, every day of the year. There's direct support over things like text, web chat, email, and more. We also have a wide variety of resources, including webinars, articles, worksheets, videos. We have tailored support about a whole range of different issues facing students. So from things such as worrying about making friends and loneliness, through to budgeting and, like I say, accessing extra funding, right through to, say, students' experiences with OCD and how you might cope with that. So there's really everything that you could think of in terms of struggles that a student might have at university represented and supported through Student Space. There's also, again, a directory of localized support, so support at a student's university, which they can use to find the exact service that they need in their local context. Next slide, please. So we've got 2 different transitions resources for students, which I think would be helpful for you to be aware of as staff members. So we've got our Know Before You Go guide, which is targeted at year 12 and 13 students. So again, those offer holders, prospective incoming students, to help them prepare for university and know what to expect. And our transitions guide as well, which is available for once they arrive. We've also got an online resource for staff who want to both use these 2 resources that I've spoken about, but also for more general guidance, which is our transitions for staff section on our website, linked on this slide. Next slide, please, Grace. So yeah, Know Before You Go. Here's just a quick sample of the kind of topics we talk about. As you can, so this is sourced from a broad range of concerns, and it's actually based on a fantastic piece of work by Dr. Stan Kutcher, who is a very accomplished professor of psychiatry based in Canada. And this really covers every aspect of the student experience you can think of. And again, is aimed at year 12 and 13 students. Next slide, please, Grace. Thank you. So transitions, our transitions report is resource is on similar topics, but it's aimed for once students arrive. So it has maybe more practical steps about things you can do right now you're at university. So the pitch is slightly different, but covering similar topics, as you can see. Next slide, please, Grace. So yeah, key takeaways and things to highlight. So contrary to preconceptions, as I said, there isn't sufficient evidence to suggest that students have worse mental health than their non-student peers, but we do know that they have different unique experiences from their non-student peers, which is why we're here to support them. One thing I also want to stress, and I really hope you'll all take away from this, is that it's very easy when we talk about student mental health to think of it in negative terms and what can we do to stop a student from suffering or having a negative experience. But we can also really think of it in terms of what can we do to help students have a positive experience and make this the best, and make this the best time of their life, like we say it's going to be. What kind of opportunities do we have here to make a positive contribution? So not just thinking about it in terms of avoiding harm, but also promoting benefits. So yeah, like I say, getting this transition right can set students up for their entire university career. So I've talked about all the different pressures on students when they transition into university. So if we can get them to support early, prevention is far better than the cure. Dealing with this idea that they're alone or that they're weird or that there's something wrong with them if they're having a hard time. If we can get them through that initial distress, we're setting them up for success throughout university careers. So universities can play a role by signposting support in pre and post arrival materials. I've talked a bit more about what that entails. And I've also spoken in general about what you can do as staff in marketing, in recruitment, supporting those transitions, what we can do to make that impact in the transition stage. So yeah, and then next slide, please. And here's just a summary again of the different resources I've mentioned today. So definitely, I've only skimmed for the sake of time, but I'd really recommend checking these out and of course getting in touch if you have any questions or want to learn more. So that's everything from me. Thank you so much to the student room for having me today.
Thank you so much, both.
Sorry, Beth, I was just about to say thank you at the same time. We both had the right idea.
Great, thank you. I know we're nearly at the end, but I just love to ask a couple of questions if people still have time. So one of the questions is, was there any insight on how students would like to receive information about support? Any thoughts on sort of the best ways to sort of get that information to students?
So we see a variety of different kind of communication techniques that universities use to speak to students around the support. Making sure that any kind of official communications that are sent out by email, that is still a really popular way that students interact with the universities that they're applying to and expect interactions via the universities they're applying to, would be a fantastic way to showcase some of this support. They are reading emails from universities that they want to go to. This kind of communication is very welcomed for students looking for support and a little bit more advice and guidance. As I mentioned, communication and any difficulties that students are having is really an important part of their decision-making process. So anything that you can add into any email communications that you're already doing is fantastic. And also just being where students are as well. So social media is a great place to showcase advice, guidance and support. Places like the student room as well. We have so many students coming to us and asking for this kind of help daily, and being able to be there and supporting students as best you can within an environment like ours, it can be really, really helpful, and just being where we know that they're asking these types of questions already. So yeah, I would definitely say that there are some various different options there. There wasn't anything specifically provided by students themselves, but just from my own kind of understanding of working with students, for as long as I have that kind of information via those different channels, can be really useful.
Great, thank you. And a question for you now, Jenny. So is student space free, or is this a system universities need to buy into to embed?
Thank you so much. Yes, Student Space is completely free. It's been funded by the OFS and HEFCU. It's aimed at students, because of that, it's aimed at students in England and Wales, but the website and services are, notionally, you can, it's not like students in Scotland and Northern Ireland hit a paywall or something when they access it. So what I would recommend is, if you're at an institution or institutional staff, you can go to the support directory and see if your institution has contributed its information, so which services are available. If it hasn't, then you can definitely go poking around at your institution and say, hey, why haven't we contributed to this directory? Because students do come to Student Space and then go to look for their specific institution and seek out help based on what your institution submitted. So that's something you can take away. But yes, completely free, confidential, and up and running for at least the next 2 years, I believe.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's so good that it's such an amazing, amazing free resource. I appreciate of time. So I'm sorry that I haven't got round to all of the questions, but yeah, anything that we haven't answered, we will get back to you on as well. Perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everyone who attended the webinar today. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you all. Jenny, it was an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for all the wonderful work that Student Minds do to support students. It's really amazing the amount of resources that you have available. And hopefully we'll be able to get those prospective applicants and offer holders the advice and support that they need over the next coming months in this kind of difficult situation that they're coming up to with exams and all the pressures surrounding that as well. So thank you all so much for attending, as I said, and hopefully see you all soon at the next webinar. Thank you.